Welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza, and today we are talking about pride. June's here, it's Pride Month, the 28th is Pride Day. Plus, we just briefly talked about the pride flag in last week's episode, so naturally, it felt like the right time to actually understand where pride came from, why it matters, and honestly, what's happening with it right now. There's a lot to unpack here. The Stonewall Uprising, those who fought back, why some folks are so threatened by pride existing at all. I'm going to get into all of it. But first, I've got some news from this past week to recap. But fair warning, it's more than I usually do, so gird your loins. First story. So, as you may or may not know, I am not a sports girly, but this is the talk of the town. It's big news. Plus, sports or not, I love an underdog story. So, if you're not aware, the New York Knicks won the NBA championship on Saturday, June 13th at Madison Square Garden. This is the Knicks' first championship win since 1973. That's 53 years. That's basically a lifetime these days. Jalen Brunson, the Knicks' best player, scored 45 points, which is a pretty big deal. The Knicks came back from being down by a lot of points, and they basically had to claw their way back up every single game, which is kind of basically how they won all season. They just kind of had all these insane comebacks. Some people say it's statistically impossible, but they didn't let the bastards keep them down, you know? And New York hasn't had this kind of energy in half a century, so obviously everyone in New York is losing their minds. The Empire State Building lit up in the Knicks' colors. People in the streets were crying, they're hugging, they're dancing, and they're honestly going quite feral. All right. And maybe they still are. I don't know. But it's just one of those moments where, whether you're a sports fan or not, you can kind of see that it's beautiful and it's fun and it brings an entire city together. It's truly a cultural moment. And of course, there's a Swiftie connection that everyone's talking about. There are reports, alleged reports, okay, that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce are getting married at Madison Square Garden on July 3rd. So basically, MSG just hosted one of the biggest sports moments of the year, and now it's possibly about to host what sounds like one of the most expensive celebrity weddings ever. Taylor's allegedly paying millions of dollars just to rent out the building for 3 days. It's kind of like our own version of a royal wedding. So I get why people are really excited and there's all this hoopla about it, you know? And speaking of obscene wealth, Elon Musk just became the world's first trillionaire after SpaceX had a record breaking initial public offering on June 12th. SpaceX went public, so investors obviously bought in, and that led to his net worth crossing $1 trillion. And I guess, this is kind of important to note. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But I see a lot of people making sure that they make this distinction. So this is money that's just on paper. His wealth is tied up in stock value. It's not sitting in a bank account, but the title still stands. He's the first person in human history to be worth $1 trillion. Though, to be fair, certain ancient rulers held incalculable wealth that honestly probably surpassed this in absolute value, but I digress. Here's the thing that is absolutely bonkers to me, though. So, as recently as summer 2024, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bernard Arnault, they were all swapping the title of world's richest person on a nearly daily basis. Their net worths were hovering around 200 billion at the time. And now, not even 2 years later, Musk has amassed a fortune worth twice as much as Bezos and Arnault put together. So in less than 2 years, his wealth quintupled. That's insane. And I want to put this in perspective because numbers this large don't often compute in most people's brains, certainly not mine. I usually need a visual. Obviously, this isn't a visual podcast, but I'm going to try to make a perspective for you. So, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the typical US worker earns $63,360 per year. So if you're making that average salary, working from now until you're old and gray and then some, how long would it take you to earn $1 trillion? Now, I'm not a math girly, but if you divide 1 trillion by 63,360, that brings you to 15,782,828 years and 3 months. Basically, you have to work for almost 16 million years straight in order to make what Elon Musk is worth right now. For a little more context, humans as a species have only existed for about 300,000 years. And now for the visualization that I keep seeing that I find helpful. Obviously, you can't see it now, but if you look it up, you can see it. Basically, if you stacked your annual income in dollar bills, if you're making that $63,000 a year, that would stand about 22-ish feet tall. And if you stacked Elon's $1 trillion in dollar bills, it would reach 67,866 miles high, which is more than a quarter of a way to the moon. So basically, you would need to work roughly 260,000 times longer than your own lifetime to reach his wealth, which is just so insane when you think about it, to see that gap between the wealthy and the regular everyday people who are told that we're doing just fine. I mean, obviously, he's the wealthiest of the wealthy, but that gap is still giant. And you might be wondering, Eliza, why does this matter? Why should we care about some dude making $1 trillion? Well, hoarding wealth aside, Elon controls SpaceX, he controls Tesla, he controls X, which I still call Twitter, whatever. He has outsized influence on technology, energy, transportation, and now the information landscape. One person's wealth is increasingly concentrated in ways that shape what technology gets developed, what gets funded, and what gets pushed out into the world. And plus, the wealth gap isn't slowing down, it's actually accelerating. When someone can accumulate $1 trillion in less than 2 years while wages for regular people have barely budged, I mean, hello, that's a structural problem with how money flows in this economy. It's not flowing to most of us. And this isn't about hating rich people or wanting to punish success. It's about asking whether one person should have this much power over the future, whether markets are designed to concentrate wealth this heavily, actually serve everyone else. Plus, trickle-down economics is a hoax, people. We aren't benefiting from his wealth. He's benefiting. He's getting the control. And speaking of control, on June 12th, the Department of Justice approved Paramount's acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. This deal is worth about $111 billion, which it sounds kind of like a whatever thing, but let me break it down for you a little bit because this is also important. This is also about control. So Paramount is about to own CNN, HBO, the Warner Brothers movie studio, HBO Max, and a good chunk of cable TV. They are consolidating massive amounts of entertainment under one company. And when only a few companies control most of what you watch and what you see in the news, your choices shrink. And then competition dies. And honestly, innovation slows down. And ultimately, for you and me, prices go up. Think about your streaming subscriptions for a second. You probably have Netflix, HBO Max, Apple TV, Disney Plus, Paramount Plus, maybe multiple, or maybe all of those. And if you have all of those, you're probably paying like $200 a month just to have options. Except you don't actually have options anymore. You are essentially just renting access to content that these companies own. You don't own any of it. And here's my hot take, and maybe it's not that hot of a take, maybe some or a lot of you share this as well. I think we need to go back to buying physical media. If there's a show or a movie you actually love and you watch it over and over again, just buy the Blu-ray or buy the DVD, buy a cheap DVD player, use your PlayStation, whatever. Just own it, have it, use it, because streaming libraries change constantly. Shows get pulled, movies disappeared, licensing deals expire, and suddenly content vanishes forever. I'm not saying cancel all your streaming services, whatever, but you have all these streaming services, and yet almost everything you want to watch requires an upgrade now, or it wants you to rent it digitally. So if you can, just buy it and have it. Mergers like this remind us that we are not actually customers, okay? We're users. And if the company decides to pull something you love, it's gone. You can't get it back. But if you own the physical copy, nobody can take that away from you. And I know it sounds old fashioned, blah, 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 whatever. But in a world where companies are consolidating everything into their hands, owning something feels kind of a little rebellious, right? Dare I say, kind of cool. And speaking of digital only, Claude, Fable 5, and Mythos 5 launched on June 9th, but by June 12th at 5:21 in the evening, they were gone, completely shut down. The US Department of Commerce, citing national security, ordered Anthropic to suspend access to both models. The reason they gave is that someone discovered a way to bypass security on Fable 5, a technique they're calling a jailbreak. You're probably familiar with the term, I'm sure, whether it's to get out of jail, make your phone work with whatever service provider, or to bypass AI security. It's all the same. And the government believed that this posed a serious security risk. So, Anthropic, faced with a government order, did the only thing they could legally do, and they shut off access worldwide for all customers. This company released what techies are calling cutting edge AI, and within 3 days, people had already started using it for real work. And then the government stepped in and yanked it offline. So, if you built your entire workflow around Fable 5, if your business already started relying on it, by Wednesday, it was gone. And you woke up on Thursday with nothing. And here's why this matters beyond just AI nerds being frustrated. This is the first time a government has directly intervened to pull a model offline. That sets a precedent. And the precedent is worrying because it shows us something that we should be paying attention to. I mentioned this before a little bit when I was talking about AI data centers and these AI basically sales reps being booed at commencement speeches. AI is being released into the world before it's actually ready or properly tested. Companies are racing. They're competing to release the newest, most powerful models as fast as possible because whoever releases first wins market share. They win the hype, they win investment money. But that speed means security testing gets squeezed and oversighted. It means real world problems show up after regular everyday people are already using it and relying on it. We are basically beta testing technology that companies are charging us money to use. And when problems surface, the government might just shut it down with no warning. That's a business risk, sure, but it's also a sign that maybe we should be more careful about how fast we're adopting AI into our lives before we actually know if it's safe. And speaking of the government stepping in, it's trying to get your private medical records. The courts keep saying no, but they keep trying anyway. On June 10th, a federal judge rejected a legal effort that would have stopped the Department of Justice from using subpoenas to demand private medical records from hospitals, specifically trans youth medical records. The Trump administration has been sending subpoenas to hospitals across the country asking for patient records of trans kids who received gender affirming care. These are asking for names, birth dates, social security numbers, medical histories, diagnoses, everything, really. Courts have been blocking these repeatedly, but the administration is very persistent. They keep trying different hospitals, different approaches, different states. It's like they're testing to see where they can actually get access. And honestly, I feel like this administration is always testing to see what it can and can't get away with, but that's just my opinion. Now, here's why this isn't just a trans issue, though, okay? This is about medical privacy for everyone. Doctor patient confidentiality is foundational. It has to be. If you can't trust that your medical information stays private, you're probably less likely to seek care. And teens, especially, won't seek healthcare if they think the government might seize their records. Obviously, this should go without saying, but that harms public health. That also harms medical research, and that leads to, honestly, harming medical innovation. If the government can subpoena medical records for one group based on who they are, that sets quite the example of a future pattern. It means any government at any time could use the same authority to demand records for other groups. Reproductive health care patients, mental health patients, substance abuse treatment patients, people seeking HIV treatment. Once that first door opens, the others are a lot harder to keep closed. And this fight honestly isn't about choosing sides on gender affirming care. Whatever your stance is on that, this is about whether medical privacy survives. It's about whether teenagers and adults can seek healthcare without fear that their information will be handed to the government. And I think we can all agree that those are universal concerns, right? Everyone should care about this. And our final news recap is also just as frustrating and honestly kind of embarrassing. Okay, so Indiana Governor Mike Braun declared June as Nuclear Family Month. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee did the same thing. Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders called it Fidelity Month. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey went with Strong Family Month. And they did this all in June, all specifically defined around heterosexuality family structures with one mother and one father, all deliberately placed against Pride Month. The Indiana Proclamation literally says the nuclear family consisting of one husband, one wife, and any biological, adopted, or fostered children is God's design. It is not subtle, not even trying to be subtle. And the graphics they're using say, "Take back the rainbow" in rainbow colored letters, as if Pride stole something that belonged to them. Like celebrating LGBTQ plus people somehow took something away from straight people. Like, why does Pride existing threaten people and these governors so much? Like, what are they actually afraid of? I feel like most people who oppose Pride don't even understand what it is. They think it's about sexuality, they think it's about pushing an agenda or forcing acceptance, but that misses the entire point. Pride started because in 1969, not that long ago, being gay was illegal. You could be arrested, you could be beaten by police, you could lose everything. And then people finally fought back and they didn't ask permission. They rioted. They said, hey, we exist. We're not hiding anymore. And then 50 some years later, we're still arguing about whether LGBTQ plus people should be allowed to exist openly. And some governors are so threatened by Pride Month that they need to create an alternative. It's insane. And newsflash, they're not celebrating straight people. Straight people celebrate themselves every single day without even thinking about it. You get to hold hands with your partner. You talk about your spouse. You get married. Nobody arrests you. Nobody fires you. Nobody denies you service. That's celebration. All Pride is doing is asking for the same thing, just to exist without fear. And if more people understood what Pride actually is, where it came from, why it matters, maybe we wouldn't need these counter celebrations. Maybe people would understand that nobody's taking anything away from anyone. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about basic visibility and acceptance. So, with that, let's talk about Pride. Let's actually understand it. So, what is Pride? In the simplest way to describe it, Pride is about visibility and remembrance. It's about saying LGBTQ plus people exist. They're part of our community, our families, our workplace, our cities, and they deserve to exist without fear. It's rooted in one specific night that changed everything. June 28th, 1969, the Stonewall Uprising. But before I dive into that, I did want to talk about something that's going to come up throughout this episode, and I think that it's important to touch on language. Because the words that we use or don't use, they matter, okay? So in 1969, people said gay. That's what they called it. The movement was the gay movement. It was the gay community. But the word gay technically included everyone at the time, not just men, but everyone in the queer community. The evolution of the language began in the 1940s and 50s when the term gay was used as slang for those who were attracted to someone of the same sex. Women didn't begin using the term lesbian until the 1970s, and that was to just kind of differentiate themselves because women in the movement said, hold up, wait a second. We are different. We have different experiences. So we need our own word. Then, in the mid to late 1980s, LGB replaced the term gay in reference to the LGBTQ plus community. The L stands for lesbian, a woman who's attracted to other women, while the G stands for gay, a man who's attracted to other men. And B was added for bisexual because bisexual people said, hey, hello, like we exist too. We need visibility. But Marcia and Sylvia, who I'm about to tell you about in a minute here, they were trans. And for a long time, they weren't included in that acronym. Though trans people have existed throughout history, the term only came into being in the 1960s. It was popularized by trans feminine activists like Virginia Prince, who argued that sex and gender are separate entities. As it replaced other terminology that mocked or minimized trans people, transgender was increasingly embraced as part of the wider LGBT rights movement. So in the 1990s, LGBT became the standard: lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. While the first three letters focus on sexual identity, transgender refers to a person whose gender identity is different from the sex on their birth certificate. And then came Q. The initialism LGBT eventually evolved to LGBTQ in recognition of the unique meaning of queer within the community. Queer is kind of this umbrella term that captures people who don't fit neatly into any of those boxes. Today we say LGBTQ plus, and that plus sign means there's more. There's always more because people are finally starting to be able to, find the words and find the meaning for who they are. And the movement keeps expanding to make room for them. The reason I'm telling you this is because I feel that when you understand the language evolution, you also understand the evolution of the movement. And, we went from just include everyone under gay to, hey, actually, we need specific language for specific experiences. That's a form of progress, in my opinion. It's people claiming visibility for themselves. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think that we should respect that. And this also brings me to something else that people get weirdly defensive about, or maybe they just don't understand, and that's pronouns. Pronouns, contrary to popular belief, are not political. Okay. Not everything is, not everything needs to be. Pronouns are quite literally grammar. There's no need to make it political. You use pronouns every single day. He went to the store. She called me. They're running late. These are just tools that we use to refer to people. So when someone tells you their pronouns, they're just making it easier for you to talk about them correctly. That's it. That's the whole thing. If you mess up, just say you're sorry and move on. You don't need to get defensive. You don't need to make it about yourself. Just correct yourself and keep going. And it only takes seconds. And actually, singular they has been used in English for centuries. It's not something new and it's grammatically correct. Chaucer used it, Shakespeare used it. It's just language evolving like language always does. Honestly, the simplicity of it is almost kind of comical if you think about it. Like, you learn someone's pronouns, you use them, you're being respectful, and it means so much to someone who wants to be identified correctly. Imagine that your name is Lily, but everyone calls you Daisy. Finally, someone calls you Lily. How validating and seen you must feel, right? It's that simple, just like using the correct name. And here's what people don't understand. Using someone's pronouns doesn't take anything away from you. It doesn't diminish your identity. It doesn't make you less straight or less cisgender. It doesn't make you less of a man or less of a woman. It just means you respect another person. That's all. All right? Okay, now that we've talked about language and why it matters and how simple it is to use, let's move on and let's talk about the people who fought so hard to make space for themselves and their identities, and actually, not even just their own, but for so many others for years to come. So we're going to take it back to 1969. In 1969, like I said, being gay was a crime. It's not me being dramatic. It was literally illegal, criminally. You could go to jail for it. But before I get into what happened on June 28th of that year, I need to back up and actually explain what life was like for LGBTQ plus people before Stonewall because I think it's important to understand why people fought back that night and understand what they were fighting against. So, anti sodomy laws. Those made homosexual acts illegal, and cross dressing was prohibited by laws that targeted really anyone wearing less than 3 articles of clothing that matched their assigned sex. You could literally go to jail simply for existing and wearing the quote unquote wrong clothing items. Police harassment of LGBTQ people was constant and systematic. I'm talking about active police conduct that had the effect of annoying, impeding, embarrassing, injuring, threatening, or intimidating such persons. And during the early 1960s, the most obvious form of police harassment resulted from the enforcement of statutes criminalizing acts of sodomy. Sodomy is a legal and religious term for sexual acts that do not lead to natural procreation. So at the time, those who were engaging in sexual acts with the same gender were roped into that term/law. And also, it wasn't just raids, which we'll discuss. Police would literally entrap people. Officers would infiltrate LGBTQ plus spaces. And because gay desire was illegal, young people would be threatened with arrest simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. A cop in regular everyday clothing would go into public bathrooms specifically to entrap gay men. They would either initiate sexual contact themselves or they would solicit it and then arrest the person for it. It was kind of like a scare you straight tactic or scare you into hiding tactic, honestly. And if you were caught, your name would be printed in the newspaper. You would likely lose your job, maybe even your family. You would, for a lot of people, lose everything. And there was nothing you could do about it because what you did was technically criminal. Police raids and harassments were a very common occurrence across the US during this time, and in the last 3 weeks before Stonewall, 5 gay bars in the Greenwich Village area of New York City had been hit by police. 5 bars in 3 weeks. Clearly, this wasn't random. When the police raided a gay bar, officers would brutally remove patrons, and sometimes protesters would gather on the street. But before Stonewall, those confrontations never really turned into actual resistance. People got arrested, they got beaten, and they just kind of, unfortunately, had to accept it. At this time, gay bars existed in these often hidden, secretive spaces. They were where queer folks could finally be themselves, at least for a few hours. But even those bars weren't safe, no matter how secretive or how hidden they were. Police raided them constantly. Officers would come in, beat people, arrest them, drag them out in front of everyone, and then you'd face all those consequences leading to your life essentially being over, right? No job, losing friends, family, name printed in the paper next to bank robbers. Then, on June 24th, 1969, police raided the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, in New York. This was a routine raid, just like the others, forcibly removed, beaten, arrested, all that stuff. But then on Friday, June 28th, something different happened. So when police started hauling people out, dragging them to squad cars, something finally broke. This time, people fought back. Customers pushed back. People on the street showed up. And then within an hour, 500 to 600 people were outside the bar confronting police. By Saturday night, the next night, 2,000 people were there holding hands, dancing, and just refusing to disperse. And this continued for 6 days. 6 days of confrontation between police and LGBTQ plus people, street kids, homeless youth, trans women, sex workers. These were all the most vulnerable people in the community, and they were there fighting the good fight. And 3 people in particular sparked the uprising. These are not names that you learn in school. They're not even in most history books, but they should be because they changed everything. So let me introduce you to Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha was born in New Jersey in 1945. She moved to New York with just a few dollars to her name, and not long after arriving, 17-year-old Marsha met 11-year-old Sylvia Rivera. Marsha taught Sylvia how to apply makeup, live on the street, and just generally looked out for her. She also encouraged Sylvia to love herself, her whole self, including her identity. You see, Marcia was a Black trans woman. She adored wearing colorful, fun outfits that she made from her finds from thrift stores and discarded items. She was also often seen wearing a crown of flowers. And Marcia, at this time, wasn't hiding. She was living openly in a time where that could very likely get her killed. Marcia was among the first of the patrons to resist the police that night. She fought for respect throughout her life for all members of the LGBTQ plus community. And after Stonewall, she established the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, also known as STAR. And she did this with Sylvia Rivera. This was a group committed to supporting homeless and vulnerable transgender individuals. Sadly, Marcia was killed in 1992 at only 46 years old. Her case was originally closed by the NYPD as an alleged suicide, but transgender activist Mariah Lopez fought for it to be reopened for investigation in 2012. But unfortunately, we and her loved ones still don't really know what really happened to her. Now, Sylvia Rivera was a Latina trans woman born in New York City in 1951. She identified as a drag queen and approached the LGBTQ plus rights movement as a revolution. Sylvia was a tireless advocate for those silenced and disregarded by larger movements. She's said to have said Marcia was like a mother to her, which I just think is so sweet and so beautiful. Sylvia was among the first in the crowd of onlookers to take action by throwing a bottle at her police oppressors. And that bottle, that one act of resistance by a homeless trans Latina kid, became the spark that lit everything on fire. Now, Sylvia's fiery demeanor contrasted Marcia's, but the two of them became fixtures in the Christopher Street gay community, and they were prominent figures at the Stonewall Inn riots of 1969. Together, they showed the world what resistance looked like when you have nothing to lose. And third, we have Stormy DeLevier. And she was different from Marcia and Sylvia, but just as crucial. Stormy identified as a butch lesbian with zero tolerance for discrimination, or as she called it, ugliness. She was born in New Orleans on Christmas Eve to a Black mother and a white father. She had a beautiful baritone voice and discovered a love for jazz at a very early age. She actually started singing in New Orleans clubs at age 15, and then soon after, she began touring around Europe and eventually landing in New York City. When a police officer clubbed Stormy over the head the night of the June 28th raid simply for saying that her handcuffs were too tight, a violent riot broke out and the crowd exploded. They could no longer stand silently and watch members of their community be assaulted and unjustly imprisoned. Stormy's shout of protest, "Why don't you guys do something?" reportedly caused Stonewall's clientele to band together to resist police violence. These three women, a Black trans woman in a flower crown, a homeless Latina trans kid, and a jazz singer who wouldn't take shit from anyone, changed the course of history because they decided that night that they were done accepting abuse. And I think it's important to note that all three have denied throwing the first punch or brick at the rebellion, yet still each of them has been called the Rosa Parks of the LGBTQ plus community. They have come to symbolize the moment when the LGBTQ plus community stopped accepting abuse and claimed the right to exist. For the first time in most of their lives, queer people stood openly in the streets without hiding. Now, before I move on, there are a couple of things about this history that do get overlooked. First, Stonewall wasn't actually the first uprising. There were a number of uprisings against police and state brutality, harassment, and entrapment of the LGBT communities in the US in the years before Stonewall. Some of the pre-Stonewall uprisings include the Pepper Hill Club raid in Baltimore in 1955, where over 162 people were arrested. Hazel's in California in 1956, the Cooper's Donut Raid in Los Angeles in 1959, and the Compton's Cafeteria Raid in San Francisco in 1966. But Stonewall is the one we often remember most. That's the one that has stuck with the general population. It's regarded as the one that sparked something that just couldn't be stopped. And that's not to diminish those other uprisings. Obviously, they were very crucial, but Stonewall just had something different. It had the visibility, it had the momentum, it had Marcia and Sylvia and Stormy. Stonewall just had that something, something, you know? Second, Marcia and Sylvia helped start today's conversation about gender nonconformity and civil rights, and were the first people who conceptualized the idea that the trans community was a distinct community with its own goals and needs. Before that, everyone was just lumped together as gay, remember? But Marcia and Sylvia said, hey, no, trans people are different. We have different needs. We need our own movement. And third, the movement didn't welcome them for that. Marcia grew frustrated by the exclusion of transgender and LGBTQ plus people of color from the movement. She actively spoke out about the transphobia in the early gay rights movement. The very movement that they helped start pushed them out. And that is kind of a messy part of history that doesn't get talked about as much as it should. But I do think it's important to lay out everything, even the messy parts too, you know? So moving forward, 1 year later, on June 28th, 1970, people organized the first Pride Parade, but it didn't really look like how Pride looks today. There were no floats, no corporate sponsors, no rainbow merchandise. Honestly, it was a protest. This march, this protest, it was to commemorate the first anniversary of the Stonewall Rebellion. It was led by activists from the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activists Alliance. The march was called the Christopher Street Liberation Day March in honor of the Stonewall Inn's Greenwich Village location. Unlike other gatherings at the time, the march would have no dress code, and its participants would focus less on politeness than pride. When the march kicked off on Christopher Street around 2 p.m. on June 28th, there were more than 5,000 marchers and an equal number of bystanders cheering them on. They filled the street, marching more than 50 blocks to Central Park, which is just wild to think about. That's more than 5,000 people all together just 1 year after the police raids. And like I said, it started out as a protest march, not this fantasia of floats and feathers that we know today. Within a few days of Stonewall, flyers were already circulating calling for a new kind of movement that wasn't polite and wouldn't stay in the shadows. But there was still fear. Although the parade permit was delivered only 2 hours before the start of the march, participants encountered little resistance from onlookers. The march actually took less than half the scheduled time due to excitement, but also due to wariness about walking through the city with gay banners and signs. And here's another little known fact that gets buried. So, since it was illegal to cross dress in New York in 1970, obviously, Pride organizers worried that police might target trans and gender nonconforming marchers. But I am happy to say that not a single arrest was made. So, after a lifetime of raids and arrests and entrapments, they finally were able to march openly without anything happening to them. Think about that. That's what visibility can do. It can bring people together and it can literally save lives. And Brenda Howard, the bisexual activist who organized this, is called the Mother of Pride because she turned one night of uprising into an annual movement. Christopher Street Gay Liberation Day enshrined the significance of the Stonewall riots in LGBT history. Eventually, the point moved on from liberation to pride, and so the Pride movement was born. And it spread fast. Parallel marches were held in Chicago, San Francisco, LA, and its success encouraged the organizers to make it an annual event. In 1971, Boston, Dallas, and Milwaukee also held marches, and internationally in London, West Berlin, Paris, and Stockholm. And here's the thing about how Pride has evolved. So, the first march in 1970, remember what I said? That was a protest. It was people saying, we are here and we're not taking this anymore. Today, Pride has become much more celebratory, right? There are floats, corporations, rainbow, glitter, music, fun. It's good. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's still visibility. It's still important. But also, I think it's still important to know why Pride exists in the first place. The march emphasized visibility, protest, and the demand for equal rights. Unlike traditional parades that we have now, there were no corporate sponsors, no barricades, just an unyielding demand for justice. Now, a lot has changed since 1969, and not just in regards to Pride celebrations. So in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Windsor that same sex couples deserved the same legal recognition and benefits. 2 years later, in 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges made same sex marriage legal in all 50 states, which means you can marry the person you love. And that's beautiful. And that wasn't possible just 14 years ago, meaning in less than 2 decades ago, your aunt couldn't marry the love of her life if the love of her life was a woman. Isn't that insane to think about? And that wasn't even that long ago. That's crazy. Then in 2020, Bostock versus Clayton County ruled that federal discrimination laws protect people based on sexual orientation and gender identity. That means employers can't fire you for being LGBTQ, which is a big deal. And that only happened 6 years ago, meaning 7 years ago, less than a decade ago. You could be fired simply for being a man with a boyfriend or being a man who wears makeup, probably. Corporate America has started acknowledging pride and cities are celebrating it. LGBTQ plus people have held major positions in government and business. So finally, there's visibility and representation that didn't exist before. And that's pretty cool. And while we're talking about progress, I want to highlight something that people often overlook. A lot of people think LGBTQ plus contributions are limited just to the arts and culture, and that's just simply not true. They have contributed to so much more that has affected and changed our daily lives. So, first, Alan Turing. Alan was a mathematician and a computer scientist. He's basically the father of modern computing. During World War II, he cracked the German Enigma code, aka the system the Nazis used to send encrypted military communications. His team's work shortened the war by an estimated 2 years and saved about 14 million lives. He also designed the automatic computer engine, one of the first computers ever built. He conceptualized what's now called the Turing machine, which laid the foundation for all modern computing and artificial intelligence. And he was gay. Lynn Conway is a transgender engineer who revolutionized microchip design. She literally changed how we build the technology we use every day. Her work influenced entire generations of computer technology development. And then Alan Emtage, another gay man, created Archie, the world's first internet search engine. So before Google, before anything, Archie was how you found things on the internet. Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple, and when he came out in 2014, he became the first openly LGBTQ plus CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Apple has continued to innovate under his leadership in ways that have literally shaped technology and culture worldwide. And that's just a few. There are so many, so many, so many more people that are LGBTQ plus and have contributed to the world. And these people have shaped technology, science, medicine, business, literally everything. And yet many of them had to hide who they were. Just imagine how much more they could have accomplished if they didn't have to spend their energy hiding or living in fear or being persecuted every day for just whatever reason that the police wanted to persecute them for. And had they been found out, we probably wouldn't have had their inventions. And that's just so sad when you think about it, that people are so close minded that they don't see the big picture when it's really so simple. LGBTQ plus people are literally just people. And honestly, closed mindedness halts human growth. Okay. It halts innovation. It halts all that good stuff. It doesn't just harm the people you're afraid of or don't understand or don't agree with or whatever. It harms all of us. And the point is simple. Okay. LGBTQ plus people have been essential to human innovation and progress, and they've done it all despite a society that has criminalized them, fired them, arrested them, and sometimes killed them. Yes, we've made some progress, but obviously there's so much work and so much more progress to still be made at the same time that we're celebrating marriage equality and employment protections. We are actively watching rights being eroded from LGBTQ plus people in real time. Remember those governors declaring Nuclear Family Month and Strong Families Month to counter pride? That's not just performative. That's a symptom of something bigger that's happening. And 24 states have banned gender affirming healthcare, not just to minors, to adults too. And why? Gender-affirming care is supported by every major medical organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the Endocrine Society, and yet state governments have decided that they know better than the doctors. Why do politicians think they know better than doctors? I'll never understand that either. Insurance companies have stopped covering gender-affirming care. Federal employees lost access to it through the federal health insurance plan because basically the government decided that this is just care that it won't support anymore. Trans students are banned from sports in more than 30 states. They're losing access to bathrooms that match their identity. Schools are literally being forced to out trans kids to their parents without their consent. And some of these restrictions are so broad that they criminalize doctors for providing care. We're talking about prosecuting people for helping trans youth transition. We're looking at potential prison time for medical providers. This isn't just some slow rollback either. This is an aggressive, coordinated restriction. And remember that story about the government trying to subpoena trans youth medical records? That's also not isolated. That is part of a larger pattern of control. It's a symptom of the same thing happening in legislatures across the country. And here is what I hope people can start to understand. Restrictions on LGBTQ plus people don't stay confined to LGBTQ plus people. And let me let you in on a little secret that really isn't a secret if you've been paying attention. Whether you love the gays or you're against it all or you just simply don't understand and you don't want to get involved, when we segregate and we diminish other humans because they're not exactly like us, it still affects us all. When the government can seize someone's private medical records because of who they are, that's a freedom issue for everyone. It means doctor-patient confidentiality, which protects you too, can be stripped away based on who's in power. When doctors are threatened with prosecution for providing evidence-based care, other doctors get scared. They stop offering care, they leave medicine, and that halts medical innovation across the board. That halts healthcare quality for everyone. And mind you, we already have a shortage of medical care providers in this country. When you pass laws targeting specific communities, the systemic fallout hits everyone, not just who's being targeted right now. We are actively rewriting the rules of medicine. All right. Several states have already enacted conscientious objection laws, allowing providers to refuse care based on personal beliefs. While politically aimed at the LGBTQ plus community, these laws fundamentally destroy the universal mandate of the Hippocratic Oath. And once you normalize the idea that a doctor can weaponize a patient's private life to deny service, you create a precedent where no one's access to routine or emergency care is safely guaranteed. The damage isn't just a localized issue. It's not just affecting the current targets. It is breaking the wider system. Public health data shows that states passing these restrictive healthcare laws see an immediate drop in overall care metrics for their entire population, including cisgender and heterosexual citizens. When doctors flee a state out of legal fear, the clinics close for everyone. Wait times skyrocket for everyone, and the standard of care drops across the board. Like I said, we are literally starving our future supply of medicine. Seriously. Data from the Association of American Medical Colleges shows a multi-year plunge in medical residency applications in states that criminalize evidence-based care. That means the next generation of physicians is looking at these legal penalties and choosing to train elsewhere or to not even train at all. When a state drives away young residents, aka medical students, future doctors, and nurses, it doesn't just lose specialized care. It loses your future family doctors, pediatricians, and general surgeons that the entire community relies on to survive. And I really want to drive this home because a broken healthcare system does not check your identity before it makes you wait 6 months for a life-saving appointment. So if you're sitting there and you feel like this doesn't affect you because you're not LGBTQ+, you're wrong. It affects you. And not to get all apocalyptic on you, but by the time people realize that an attack on one group's medicine is an attack on everyone's infrastructure, it will already be too late. When a government can control what medical care that you are allowed to have based on your identity, that is control. And governments that learn to control healthcare for one group can expand that control to other groups based on whatever they want to base it on. So it could be your age, your gender, your ability to have children or not, your religion, your skin color, your bloodline, anything, even as simple as the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, where you live. So, I mean, this is all about medical freedom. It's about autonomy. It's about privacy. And I think that those are all things that everyone should care about. And when you're so close minded and focusing on wanting to be the victim and thinking that having Pride Month or Pride Day is somehow taking away from you, like it's not. It's, if anything, it's honestly benefiting you, even if you don't fall into LGBTQ plus. Now, I want to circle back and I want to address the whole why do they need a whole month question that people are often asking when it comes to Pride Month or Pride Day. And I do think it's worth explaining. I mean, this whole episode kind of explains it, so I'm not going to get all preachy on you. Let's just do a little recap. Okay, so in 1969, existing as a gay person publicly meant risking arrest, violence, losing your job, losing your family, basically losing everything, right? So, really, as we discussed, the parade wasn't a celebration. They weren't celebrating what they had gone through. The queer community at this point was still very much targeted and treated as less than. The parade was a protest, and not to be dramatic, but it was honestly also about survival, because in 1969, the status quo was slowly killing people. If you couldn't hold down a job, if you were constantly targeted by police, and if you were forced to live this double life, that's not actually living. That's hiding. And isolation is deadly. When society tells you that you're broken and alone, finding your community is a literal lifeline. The protest was about demanding the right to exist in this world without being destroyed for it. Stepping into the streets together wasn't just a political statement, it was a way to look around and realize, like, hey, I'm not the only one, and we can protect each other. Safety in numbers, being visible in numbers is safer than being visible alone. The alternative was to be institutionalized, go to prison, or constantly suffer violence. This was a time where humans were being actively policed just because of who they loved or how they identified or how they dressed. Being out and proud wasn't just a lifestyle choice or to, shove anything in anyone's faces. It was the only way to stop a system that was designed to erase queer people entirely. And now, fast forward to today, marriage equality is legal, employment discrimination based on sexual orientation is illegal federally, and that's some progress. But like I said, there's still a lot that's still very much messed up. Tens of millions of dollars are being spent on legal challenges to LGBTQ plus rights. There's so much still that I just don't understand why people are so upset that other humans just want to be treated the same as everyone else. No one's taking anything away from you by wanting to be treated the same as you. Pride matters because we are still fighting the same basic fight, and that is to simply have the right to exist, the right to receive medical care, the right to participate in sports, the right to go to school and have your name and pronouns respected, the right to not have your medical records handed to the government. Pride also matters because, like I said, visibility literally saves lives. Young LGBTQ plus people who see other LGBTQ plus people living openly, thriving, and not hiding, that tells them they're going to survive too, that there's a future for them. Pride Month is June because of Stonewall, because on June 28th, 1969, people fought back. So we're not talking about a month just to have a month. We're talking about a month dedicated to remembering the people who risked arrest and violence and honestly their lives so that LGBTQ plus people could just simply exist the way that everyone else does. Pride is about honoring that fight. Like most holidays or remembrances, Pride is about saying this history matters to everyone and these people matter. And like I said, it's also about visibility. Every June, LGBTQ plus people and allies come out and they celebrate and they remind everybody how we got here. They march, they celebrate, they say, hey, We're here, we're part of your community, we're not hiding, and it's a good thing. We should be so proud. I mean, I wish that there had never been a time where LGBTQ plus people had to live in fear, but they did, and they fought. And I love my friends in the queer community, and I just want my friends to feel safe in society. I want them to not be denied rights or have fear of being themselves just because they're gay or transgender or anything else that falls into LGBTQ plus. And I know I keep saying this, but it really is so important. For a lot of people, especially young people, seeing that visibility is truly life saving. I cannot stress that enough. It's the difference between thinking you're alone and knowing you're part of something larger. When governors try to rebrand June as something else, they're trying to erase that visibility. They're trying to make it smaller and quieter and less noticeable. And they are the ones taking something away from someone. But thankfully, Pride has never been quiet. It started with a riot, it continued with marches and celebration and refusal to be invisible. And most importantly, it was never to take away from anyone else. So that's a little bit about pride. I know that I repeated myself a little bit and I kind of went on some tangents, but we went over the history, the progress. We also talked about the fights that we're still having today. And I hope that you understand now why, even in 2026, we still need a month to say that LGBTQ plus people deserve the right to exist without fear. Straight or not, pro, queer, or anti, I encourage you to really look at pride. And I know it sounds so silly and so elementary to say this, but try putting yourself in their shoes. Like, what if you were constantly being persecuted, fired, beaten, killed, whatever, just because you were straight, just because you had blonde hair, just because you had 10 fingers? Like, it sounds pretty fucking nuts, right? Think about it that way. We're all living on this earth together. We all affect each other. Why make it harder for anyone? Like, I know this sounds very Miss America, I want world peace, but truly, like, it's not that hard to just not be an asshole. Just try looking at the bigger picture. Anyway, with that being said, if you've got thoughts on today's episode, if you want to talk about it, please send me a DM. You can find me on Instagram at indistinct.pod or at Eliza Hollister. I would love to hear what you think, what resonated, what you want to know more about. Maybe I missed some important details or I got something wrong. Let me know so I can learn and I can address those in a future episode. Also, please feel free to let me know how I can be a better ally because I also think that's important and I would love to be a better ally and I love learning and growing. And lastly, wherever you're listening, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Music, etc., please subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. It truly helps me so, so, so much. It's what helps others find my little podcast. And we will chat next week. Love ya. Love you. Bye.